Good morning. It's a beautiful day in the Indian Ocean. Lots going on outside, but we're going to put that on abeyance for a little while you are in here. As you know, I am Ed, and we're going to talk about how life began in the ocean and how it continues to replicate. You all are well-educated people. You have been to many, many lectures. Some of those move at 5 miles an hour, some move at 60. With apologies, we're going 70 or 75. So please buckle your seatbelts, and we are going to get started. Right now in the Mozambique Channel, very productive area. You've seen the algae on the water. Maybe you saw the pod of dolphins a few minutes ago, and there's probably lots of other things going on out there. Very productive waters, nutrients coming into this from the south equatorial current, a lot of stirring up, mixing up, bringing nutrients up from the bottom, and so there are at least half a dozen, maybe more like 10 species of dolphins here, several species of whales, lots of stuff going on. So make sure that you spend some time out on the deck taking a look. Early Earth, 4.56 billion years ago. This was a nasty place to live. You couldn't live. There was no life. It was hot. It was unsafe. Temperature in the ocean was at least 150 degrees Fahrenheit. There was no ozone, so anything that stuck its head above water would have been fried by the ultraviolet. So there was no life on land. There was no life on the ocean initially. No oxygen in the atmosphere. There was no way that an oxygen-breathing and aerobic animal like you or me could live. So a pretty nasty place. But very quickly, life began. And we got a clue as to how that happens in 1977. Jack Corliss, geologist with Oregon State University, go Beavers, was in the Alvin. And he's on an expedition very close to the Galapagos Island. And the rest of the expedition is dedicated to biology. So all the biologists are up on Lulu, which is the ship that held Alvin. And Jack calls out and he says, "Hey guys, I'm at the bottom here and there's not supposed to be anything living here, right?" And the biologists think, "You're a dumb geologist, what do you know?" "No, there's nothing down there, Jack." And he says, "Well, there's all these animals down here." And he changed science. He changed our fundamental understanding of life on Earth because he found black smokers. And black smokers are an area where water seeps into these hot magma chambers and picks up minerals and comes gushing out at 300 degrees Fahrenheit, where everything else in the surrounding area is about 2 degrees, I'm mixing it up, 2 degrees centigrade. It's just above freezing, but here it's 350 degrees, and that richness come gushing out of these fissures in the ocean floor. That richness of chemicals supports life, and we call that chemosynthesis, making life out of chemicals. When you were in school, when I was in school, we were taught that all life starts with photosynthesis. If you don't have chlorophyll, you don't have life. And so when we looked throughout the universe for other forms of life, we looked for the signature of chlorophyll. You don't need chlorophyll. Yeah, most everything we know depends on it, but you don't have to have chlorophyll when you have these other chemicals, and we have bacteria, single-cell animals that are able to transform that chemical into energy. And those single-cell animals are eaten by these 6-foot-long clams and dozens of other animals that are all clustered around the vent. Go 300 yards from the vent, nothing, or very little. Right there at the event, there's a richness of life, all depending on chemosynthesis. No light down here, This is so deep that there's absolutely no light, no photosynthesis, immense pressure, and immense cold. So a very inhospitable environment compared to what we expect where life may have begun, but life began most probably in these hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the ocean. And it turns out that after we found the initial hydrothermal vents, we find them around the world. And I don't know what the exact number is of discoveries, but now that we know to look for them, we find them. And this is a very fuzzy picture. Calvin showed one the other day of just this. Marie Tharp at Lamont Doherty put these things together back in the early 60s, I think it was, and radically changed our view of the ocean. So here's the mid-Atlantic ridge, and if I flip back, there's the hydrothermal vents, and similarly around the world. So at these mid-ocean ridges, we have hydrothermal vents, not continuously, but we find them where the crust is very thin and water seeping in and bringing up the nutrients. And many of these could be the launching points for life, could have been the launching points of life. Let me point out, Alvin has made 3,000 dives since she came into being. Alvin standing for Al Vine, researcher at Woods Hole Oceanographic. Alvin was awarded a Bill Proxmire's Golden Fleece Award, 1977. You remember the Golden Fleece Awards? And a lot of those were pretty funny. But Senator Proxmire, said, "What a waste of money." Think not, Bill. This is one of the best investments ever made. Alvin continues to this day. So the first life was single-cell animals, very, very simple animals, and they're getting their energy from that mix of chemicals that's coming out superheated. Over time, they evolved to cyanobacteria. We used to call this blue-green algae. Simple animals, they getting their energy from the chemicals in the deep sea. No life yet at the surface, no life yet on land, but cyanobacteria, as they expand throughout the ocean, they develop a sunscreen as they get closer and closer to the surface. That sunscreen they develop is called chlorophyll. And lo and behold, once they had that chlorophyll to protect them from the UV light, they were able to use that energy from photosynthesis, and now they have a new way of getting energy. And so the blue-green algae invent, if you will, photosynthesis, and now life can take off at the surface. And now for the first time, we start to produce oxygen biologically. And so before there was not enough oxygen on the surface to do much of any living, now we start to get oxygen produced. We see cyanobacteria in stromatolites. These are a very ancient, maybe 3 billion year old form of life that still exists today. They're cyanobacteria mixed with sediment, and they form into these rock-like features. This is in Western Australia. There are a few other places on the earth you can continue to see them. So cyanobacteria somehow picked up the ability to photosynthesize. And you might think, well, that's kind of arcane, who cares? Every green plant in the universe uses that same approach. Somehow, we had a horizontal gene transfer from cyanobacteria into a whole variety of other organisms that now constitute green plants. You know vertical gene transfer. You've probably participated in this. If you have kids, two come together and we have the next generation, a sharing of genes. Horizontal gene transfer is something that we've only recently begun to understand. Mostly we understand it through diseases. But not only are genes passed from parent to offspring, but they can be passed from one organism to another. Viruses can share genes, bacteria can share genes. It's a relatively new field, and I know very little about it except that it occurs, and that ability, that genetic ability to photosynthesize has spread throughout the world as the ability as green plants. And so 1 billion years ago, there was very, very low levels of oxygen in the atmosphere, way too low to support life on Earth or most any organism requiring oxygen. Then, all of a sudden, the oxygen level in the atmosphere started to rise. And this is called the Great Oxygen Event. Not until 400 million years ago did it get up to its current level. At this point right here, if you had that much oxygen in the atmosphere, you are unable to strike a match and get a flame. Not enough to support. This is the level required for human beings to survive. So until roughly 400 million years ago, people, animals, could not survive on land. Then we take this big jump up, back down, and now we're at a steady 22% of the atmosphere. That 22% is maintained by green plants on land and the algae in the ocean. About 50-50. We argue back and forth which contributes more. As the algae in the ocean decreases, as we cut down more and more green plants, the production of oxygen decreases. And we don't have much leeway there, do we? It's pretty tight fit. So why did oxygen take off? Well, we had more production, and the surface of the Earth is largely covered in iron. And until that iron is converted to iron oxide, it grabbed all the oxygen that was being produced by those cyanobacteria, and it made rust. And until all that iron was converted, we couldn't start to accumulate oxygen in the atmosphere. That oxygen in the atmosphere can break down and form ozone. That ozone protects us from ultraviolet light. The rays of the sun in the ultraviolet spectrum hit the ozone, they break it apart, generating heat, and then it reforms back into ozone. And so the ozone is the reason that life now can exist on land or on the surface of the ocean. Until we had oxygen, we didn't have ozone. Until we had ozone, there was no life on land. Then, once oxygen is in the atmosphere, we had an explosion of biodiversity, the Cambrian explosion. More species created in a short period of time than anywhere else in the history of the Earth. Part of the reason this all occurred is because very early in Earth's history, maybe 200 million years after the planet formed, we got hit by Theia. This planet-like blob of rock smacked into Earth 200 million years into its existence, bounced off, and became the world's first satellite. We call it the moon. And it circulated around the Earth about 3 Earths diameter away. In other words, it was huge in the sky. It just dominated the sky. And it circled around us every 5 hours. Or we circled around it every 5 hours. So the length of the day when it formed was 5 hours. Today, of course, the length of the day is 24 hours. Think, as you approach your work or your daily living, what could you get done in 5 hours? Not very much. Thank goodness the moon is there. As it moved away from us, it slowed down our rotation, very slowly. It moves a few centimeters each year, farther and farther away. Eventually, we'll lose the moon. It will be gone. It will spin off into space. But right now, it's continuing to move away. And as the length of the day increases, that gives the cyanobacteria and the other photosynthesizers more time to produce oxygen. One of the reasons we had the great oxygen event was Thea hit us and over time slowed down the day-night cycle on Earth so the bacteria have time to produce oxygen. At the same time, the sun has become 30% brighter. Since our beginning, the sun is getting brighter and brighter. Eventually, it's going to get so bright that we will fry, but you and I probably don't have to worry about that. We have a few billion years. So the sun has gotten brighter, the day has gotten longer, bacteria have an opportunity to produce more oxygen, and now we have life on Earth. In the ocean, we have phytoplankton. So a rich diversity of microscopic plants are floating throughout the surface. I'm sure you take an occasional or maybe an often walk in the woods. As you go through the woods where we live, it is rich with Doug fir and cedar and hemlock and pine. And as you walk through those woods, you may hear some birds, but often you won't see a single animal. Everything you see around you is a plant. If you went in the water the other day and you snorkeled on that reef, everything you saw was an animal, right? You didn't see any plants, or you crossed the grass bed, I guess, and you saw those, but everything else was an animal. In the woods, you'll never see, or rarely will see, two animals of different species interacting. On that reef, you saw cleaning behavior, you saw chasing, you saw lots and lots of interaction between different species. The point being, they're very, very different environments, and it's kind of fun to speculate on what's the basis for that. Anyway, here's the plants of the ocean, the phytoplankton. They're out there by the bazillions, and they are with the sun photosynthesizing and making the food for all the animals in the ocean. Okay, we have started life on Earth. We've got a 24-hour day. We've got 22% oxygen in the atmosphere. We've got roughly 8 million species, we think. We've only cataloged about 2 million species. Only 250,000 species have we cataloged in the ocean. But we know there's many, many more out there. Once we've started life, how is it sustained? And one answer to that is sex. The first multicellular animal, the first sexual reproducer, is a sponge. Very simple animals. They draw water in through pores, they filter out the good stuff, and they kick the rest of the water out the top. And so, very simple, very widespread animals, and they reproduce asexually. If you rip off a piece, it can reproduce by itself, but they also reproduce sexually. So there's a male sponge and a female sponge, and the male sponge or the female will release eggs. The male will follow with sperm. The sperm may not encounter the eggs, and that fertilized eggs, if it lands on an appropriate surface, will start to grow the new sponge. That's broadcast spawning. In other words, I'm not sending you to college. I'm not giving you the keys to the car. All I'm doing is putting lots and lots of you out there, and good luck, you're on your own. So another broadcast spawner is the oyster. The female may produce 500 million eggs and release them. When the male senses that, the male will release the sperm, and just by random chance, we think, maybe it's not random, but by chance, the sperm will meet the egg, will eventually find the right place to settle down to call home, and reproduce itself. So we're talking right now about animals that have one sex, but many animals in the ocean have two or more sexes. And so as I talk for the next 20 minutes, we're going to go from fairly simple to increasingly complex to downright bizarre. So here's the oyster reproducing. There's the female on the right. Here's the male over here. And I presented this as an example of sexual reproduction, but they don't maintain sexes. So as oysters get older, they will change sex from male to female. And that's a very common pattern. I'll give several other examples of that. And one reason they do that is the larger organism, the larger the female is, the more eggs she can produce. Small fish, small number of eggs. Big fish, lots and lots of eggs. You catch all the big fish, you're not going to get more fish because the small ones can't reproduce fast enough. So one way of overcoming that issue is by having animals change from male to female. So oysters change from male to female. Other animals change from female to male, and we'll see that in just a second. And some are simultaneously both male and female. So the barnacle, it's a sequential hermaphrodite, meaning that it starts life as a female. If when the male in your circle of friends dies, a female gets promoted up to become the male. The barnacle is unique in that it has the largest penis per body size of any animal in the animal kingdom. The penis is 8 times larger than the animal itself. And so the male can reach to all the females surrounding him and impregnate them with its sperm. Coral, sessile organism, meaning it lives on the bottom. We've seen some beautiful examples of coral in our snorkel a couple days ago. So reproduction in corals can be hermaphroditic, meaning one coral has both male and female parts and produces these eggs. And here is a time lapse of the egg production. The eggs float to the surface, they're carried away, and here's a bit of magic, because as those eggs are carried away, without a brain, without a sensory organism, without a mechanism for moving, no fins, without any of that, somehow the coral can sense the right place to land and goes towards a healthy reef as opposed to an unhealthy reef, and settles down and grows, hopefully becoming a new coral. Here's a sexual release. This is I think this is a female that just released a mass of eggs that stimulates the male to release his sperm, and they mix and off they flow, the fertilized eggs. As you can imagine, timing is critical. I mean, if she releases in December and he releases in March, we have no next generation. So timing is critical, and we come down to that magic night. This is in Curacao. We're helping these guys collect the sperm and egg. So with a giant syringe, as soon as a coral releases eggs or sperm, he is drawing up the syringe, collecting them, taking them back to the lab to grow, where they'll be for 5 years, and then once they're large enough, ripping them off, taking them out to the reef, and cementing them to hard rock in an attempt to grow more coral. So here's this magic night. Coral typically have 3, 4, 5 magic nights a year. Typically August, September, or July, August, September, a day or 2 days after the full moon. So there's a timing there that everybody understands. I say everybody, every coral understands, and a lot of other animals at the same time. Because this is the night you want to fill the water with your sperm and your eggs, overwhelming any predators that may gobble them. If I release today and you release tomorrow, a predator can eat today and eat tomorrow, and we're not getting anywhere. So by overwhelming predators with this mass release, they can't get them all. So this is that magic night off Cozumel. And typically on a night dive, you come up from a night dive and there's nothing. The water's clear. It's a beautiful experience. On this night, I had things crawling through my beard, in my ears, in my hair, in my shorts, everywhere. There was stuff. Some of it eggs and sperm, some of it worms, whole variety of things. So watch the worms. Look at all the stuff in the water. The one guy here is a worm that spends its entire life in the bottom, going through the sediment, and on this magic night, he, she, it, rises out of the sediment, wiggles around, and releases either eggs or sperm, and then life is over, and the body falls to the bottom, and that's all she wrote. So on this magic night, we had worms all over the place, rising up, wiggling around, and collapsing back down. There he is, releasing some eggs. Boom, exploding worms. Okay, you with me? We're moving up a step of complexity here. So this is a salp. It's an organism. It's difficult to see because it's 99% transparent. But sometimes if you're in the water just sitting there, especially if you're scuba diving and you're at a rest stop, a breathing stop, you'll see one float by. And they're very pretty. It has both sexual and asexual reproduction. We call that alternating generations. So one generation is purely asexual, the next is purely sexual. Here is the asexual form, this oosid. It's producing this long chain of individual ovids that are all female. And so it eventually will release that long chain of females that will produce eggs. Older long lines switch to becoming males, and so the older ones will release sperm to match up with the younger ones releasing eggs. So that's the sexual reproduction, and then the product of that sexual reproduction will be this larger guy over here, which reproduces asexually. So back and forth we go. Jellyfish do the same thing. Oops, sorry. So we're familiar with jellyfish as a medusa form, but the medusa, the male and female medusas produce a larva. The larva sinks to the bottom, gets embedded, produces these polyps, upside down polyps. These polyps eventually are free. They float up to the surface, and they flip over, and they become the next generation. So we've got a sexual reproduction and an asexual reproduction alternating back and forth. Anybody been to Jellyfish Lake in Palau? Wonderful experience if you get there. It's not easy, but there's a lake, a freshwater lake on a tiny island in the middle of nowhere in the Western Pacific, and the lake has tens of thousands of jellyfish, all of which have lost their ability to sting. They don't need it. They all photosynthesize. Wow, jellyfish photosynthesizing, but the bottom is littered with these polyps that it's just an easy place to see the polyps. Okay, moving up to fish. This is also in Palau. Fish have many different reproductive techniques, but one of them is let's all meet up November 1st at this rock, this place, this whatever, and as we meet up, eventually when the whole gang is there, a female will rush to the surface, one single female, and she'll release her eggs. And then the males will follow, and then the females and we had this big mixture of fish and eggs and sperm to maximize the possibility that each egg will be fertilized. So we got this huge school. This is Jax off the coast of Mexico, and they're getting together. They're not ready yet, but they're getting close. And here is that school. This is at an undisclosed location, because you can imagine that one trawler would come through here and wipe out an entire generation of fish. So this is just before, because things will speed up, and eventually the female will jump up there and start the process. An entirely different approach is the white-spotted puffer off the coast of Japan. This is the male. He has created this nest, 6-foot wide nest, and he's done it. You notice he doesn't have hands. He can't pick up the grains of sand. He has to move the sand by wiggling his tail or blowing water onto the sand, and he made that pattern. And he made that pattern to attract a female. And as the females go by, if they like that pattern, she may come and lay up to 100,000 eggs. He will cover it with his milt, cover it with sand, and he'll go off and do it again. Takes maybe 2 weeks to make one of these nests. Pretty cool, right? Sergeant majors have it a little bit easier. We saw lots and lots of sergeant majors on the snorkels that we have done. The female lays the eggs. The male is larger and is more color. He will add his milk to the eggs, and then he'll guard the eggs. The female, when the male dies, gets eaten, whatever, the largest female will then move up and become the male. Why do we want the males to be larger? Because we're guarding eggs. And switching from female to male is beneficial when the male's job is to chase other fish away from eating the eggs. Super blue wrasse, same thing. Here's a female, 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 one male. When that super blue dies, gets eaten, the largest female will move up and become the new super blue. She'll change color, she'll change her behavior, she'll become much more aggressive, and change the internal dynamics so she can start producing sperm instead of eggs. The exact opposite are all the Nemos that you saw. You saw there were lots and lots of, well, not lots, there were good number of anemones and clownfish or anemone fish. They start off as males, and they're paired up with a larger female, an anemone. When the female dies, the male will then switch over, become the female, will grow in size, start producing eggs, and will attract a smaller male to come in and join her. These are incredible animals. I don't think we yet know how they survive in an anemone, because the anemone would gladly eat them if the anemone knew they were there. But somehow, we used to say that they just gathered mucus from the anemone and covered their bodies, so when the anemone touches them, it senses its own mucus and not the fish. Other people have other theories, and we're back and forth, and I'm not sure who's got it right. So this is another example of sequential hermaphrodism, but this one is males becoming females. So the advantage, male to female, the larger the animal produces more eggs. Female to male, the larger animal protects the eggs. And then we have simultaneous, the hamlets. Not many hamlets, there are many, many of them, but some hamlets are simultaneous hermaphrodites. So two of them will come together and somehow they agree, okay, it's your turn to be the male, I'm the female, and then later they will again encounter each other and switch roles. So neither fish is able to inseminate itself, but they share the ability to change their sex. Other fish are jawfish, where the male's responsibility, the female bears most of the energetic costs, but the male takes the fertilized eggs into his mouth, maybe 100 eggs, and for up to 2 weeks will tend those. He'll make sure they get plenty of water, plenty of oxygen, and then only when they're ready, he will release them to the wild. You know the story of salmon. They live most of their lives in the ocean. They go up the rivers to breed. The female comes in and makes a red. She will come in and wiggle her tail, clean out a space, deposit her eggs. The males will line up and fight with each other to deposit their milt, and then the female will cover that area in a nice clean pattern, red coming from the Scottish word for a tidy area. And then when the eggs hatch, they go through a series of stages. Eventually they go back to the ocean and they will return to the exact same stream in which they were hatched. Amazing process. Eels do exactly the opposite. They live their lives in North America and Europe, and then when it's time to reproduce, they go to the Sargasso Sea and they produce this thing called an elver. Took years and years for biologists to associate the elvers they saw with the eels. I mean, they don't especially look like each other, and why would you suppose that one would transpose into the other? Midshipmen are interesting because now we have 3 sexes. We got male. Male is a big guy, big voice. You'll hear it in a second. Female, quite a bit smaller. And type 2 male, quite a bit smaller than the big guy. The big guy will keep away any other males from his female, but he doesn't recognize the little guy as a male. He thinks it's another female. So, although this guy is 1/7 the size of the big guy, his reproductive organ is 7 times larger than the big guy. The big guy's got size, he's got voice, but small reproductive organs. And there's the big guy calling, trying to attract a female. So three genders, if you will. And we see the same sort of thing in cuttlefish. Here's the big dominant male. They change color to match their surroundings or to indicate their emotional state. Here, male and a female. So what's a small guy got to do to get some attention? He paints half his body, the half that's facing the big male, he paints that like he's a female. The other side of his body, which is facing the female, he'll paint as a male. And so he'll have this split coloration trying to sneak his way in and deposit his sperm into the female. Here is a cuttlefish egg. This is in Indonesia. You can see it form pretty well. Very different animal is the anglerfish. It lives very, very deep in the ocean. The chance that one anglerfish will find another anglerfish when it's time to spawn, that opportunity is very, very limited. And so how do they solve the problem? The male angler, which has the largest nose in the animal kingdom compared to body size, he can sniff out a female, he finds one, he bites into her back, and then he ceases to be a separate organism. He loses his ability to digest food. He gets all his energy from her blood system. He's only there for the ride, and when she says, "I'm ready," he's got the sperm ready to go. So it solves the problem of trying to find an appropriate mate when there's so few of you in the ocean. Sharks are, 350, 400 species of sharks. They've got 3 major ways of reproducing. Here's a shark coupling. There's the penis for the male and the cloaca for the female. One vent does everything in the female. Here's the live birth of a great white. I'm not sure I'd want to be the diver sitting there catching the baby of the great white, but anyway. Sometimes on a beach you'll find one of these egg cases. More often than not, it's a skate egg case. Skates and sharks are pretty closely related, but it's a complete egg case. The female releases it. The embryo inside grows up eventually, breaks out of the egg case. Third mechanism is producing eggs that are kept internally. So the mother, she's impregnated, she has many, many eggs. Some sharks have 2 uterus, and so there'll be a band of eggs and a band of eggs. They're fertilized, they're growing. The first one that hatches in each uterus eats all the others. And so as many eggs as she produces, only 2 pups will emerge. There's a term for that, eating your brothers and sisters in utero, but anyway. So we have 3 different methods of reproduction depending on the species of the shark. And we discovered a new one, parthenogenesis. Many animals have this ability, but not very many vertebrates have this ability. So she, in a tank in an aquarium in Australia, without a partner, produces a live clone. Turns out that there are several species of shark that can do this. Somehow they sense, I'm never going to meet Mr. Right, and she produces the next generation by herself. This is the appropriate time to say, that's neat. Some of you didn't participate in that. Okay. All right, sea turtles, more like we're used to. This area is pretty rich in sea turtles. As we get in coastal waters, looking over the side, you may see one sunning herself or himself on the surface. The females with eggs like to sun themselves on the surface, warms the eggs up, speeds the process a bit. So here's the male and the female, and then here's the female depositing these larger than a golf ball, maybe tennis ball size eggs. She's got this oviduct and cranks them out. Typically about 100 eggs. She's dug the nest, she'll cover the nest. We saw a couple beaches where you could see the tracks up the beach of the female. Maybe next time I'll do the pre-show of an arrabata, which is a very rare event. Only a few places in the world have one. We had our students at an arrabata in Costa Rica when 70,000 turtles came ashore one night on a beach 900 meters wide. One turtle on top of another, knocking my students over. They're trying to measure the turtles and count the eggs. Mass event. If you ever have the opportunity, it is, I think, breathtaking to out in the middle. They come ashore in the dark, and they're just laboring up the beach. If you're keen on sea turtles, we can talk about that. Look at the body language here. Here's the female. There's the male. What does that body language tell you? This is not the warm embrace. It's not the hug. Let's not get close. He's as far away as he can be and yet delivering the goods. Because he knows that after he delivers the goods, she's just as likely to eat him as not. And so he's looking for the door to get out of there as soon as he can. Once she has the fertilized eggs, she deposits them in a lair, typically on the underside of a rock, and you can see each of the the octopus growing there, and she will spend the rest of her life ventilating that lair to make sure there's plenty of oxygen to the eggs. There, the eggs are hanging down, and the rest of her life is spent doing this. And how long? 4.5 years for this octopus. Most octopus is much, much shorter, but this octopus, 4.5 years in Monterey Bay, was found by the same team of researchers over and over again with the same batch of eggs. Seahorses are most interesting. Here is the male and the female. She is transferring the eggs to his pouch. Once they're in his pouch and floating around, he will inseminate them, or he'll release his sperm so it can match up with the eggs. And then the baby seahorses will attach to the inside of his pouch, and he will produce chemicals similar to milk to nourish those baby seahorses until they're ready to birth. So we have a reasonably equal distribution of energy demands between the female and the male. So there's the little guys coming out, having been inside daddy for some time. So yeah, who asked the question, who's your daddy or who's your mommy? It's kind of hard to tell. So here is the live birth, the little guys coming out. They have quite a ritual. The male and the female bond together over a course of a couple weeks. Every day they meet at the same time and dance around each other and I guess determine that they're suitable partners. And then finally she delivers the eggs to him and he does an external fertilization inside his pouch and nourishes them. Okay, now we're ratcheting up to a little bit more bizarre. This is a sea hare, which is a mollusk, similar to a clam or an oyster, except it has no shell. It's a soft-bodied thing. It emits ink if it's disturbed. It's a herbivore. It eats plants on the bottom. It is also a simultaneous hermaphrodite. So each one has both male and female parts. And so when several of them get together, they make a long line. The ones on the end only get to be male or female. The ones in the middle get to be male and female. And sometimes they will close that into a circle, and so everybody gets to be both male and female, and they produce that mass of eggs in the center. Let me hear you. Thank you. Nudibranchs, 3,000 species in the ocean, exceptionally colorful. How do they live when they're so flamboyant? You would think everybody would come over and gobble them up. Well, they would, except that the nudibranch eats soft corals and ingests, but does not digest, the stinging cell. And it takes those stinging cells and it puts them on all these frilly, fancy things. So come and eat me, guy, but if you do, you're going to be sorry because you're going to get a mouthful of stinging cells that I have harvested from the soft coral. So a pretty good defense mechanism, and there's some animals that eat them, but most animals give them a wide berth. They're simultaneous hermaphrodites. So here are two that are in the process of mating. Step it up a level. Here are flatworms. Whoops. There's the nudibranch laying eggs. Now we're into flatworms. And we're getting to about the limit of bizarreness here. These guys, I think, are hard to see. 25,000 species of them, freshwater, saltwater, fairly small animals. And what do you do to push the for growing the eggs off on the other partner? They are simultaneous hermaphrodites, and what they do to decide who's going to be mama, they have a penis fencing contest. So here's the penis. They have two each, and you will see them trying to impregnate the other one to deliver the sperm. Once that's done, the loser will have to go off and raise the eggs. The winner goes off and finds another flatworm to inseminate. So here they are. There's the stilla, or the penis, and back and forth they go, trying to get that in to inseminate the other guy, gal. Thank you. An unprovoked response. Good. Okay, sedations. We're not going to deal too much with mammals for obvious or unobvious reasons. There is some real bizarre behavior, and we're not going to go there, except to say that this is more of what we expect in an animal and a mammal. Long penis, 5-6 feet long in a humpback whale. Every once in a while you'll find in a maritime museum or an aquarium somebody has carved one out and dried it, and typically they're pretty good size. Depending on the species, the female can resist. The female might swim upside down, making it impossible for the male to join her. She may be looking, Corinne yesterday mentioned making the song or doing the splash or whatever, but somehow she eventually chooses who she wants to mate. Right whale is interesting in it. It's a more primitive whale. It doesn't have the throat pleats that the humpback has. Huge, huge mouth. More than a quarter of its body length is mouth. And it has the smallest brain per body size of any of the great whales. And the male has the largest penis of any whale relative to its size, up to a little short of 9 feet. The gonads are 2 meters long, so with a very small brain and a very large private part, I suggest what this guy is constantly thinking about. They're not doing an especially good job. The population around the world is plummeting. I think North Atlantic, there's 74 of them left. In Cape Town, I don't think we're arriving when they are, but in Cape Town, as we go in, you might be able to see them, and they can put on a fabulous display. Barbara and I paddled up to 2 of them that were sleeping one time just east of Cape Town, and we could hear them snoring from about a quarter mile away. We didn't know what it was. We just heard the snore, and we got up, and all of a sudden, there they are right in front of us, sound asleep. But sometimes they will be clearing the water in Cape Town Harbor, so all ports are great to be out on the deck for, but that's an especially great one. So sexual reproduction, the benefit is it shuffles the genes, and so you have opportunity to produce new behaviors, new adaptations in the next generation. And so if conditions are changing, you want the next generation to be slightly different somehow to possibly adapt to that change. Asexual reproduction, when conditions are favorable, they can reproduce very quickly. They don't have to wait to find Mr. Right or Mrs. Right. They can reproduce quickly and don't expend any energy in finding the other one. In addition to that, we have what's called R strategy and K strategy. An oyster is an R strategy. They produce very tiny eggs. They take no parental care. You make massive, massive numbers, 500 million eggs, and just release them and say, we're done, you're on your own. Whales are an example of the K strategy. They're large, very slow to mature, very few offspring, and extensive parental support. So we have sexual, asexual, single sex, multiple sex, K and R, lots of different strategies in the ocean to reproduce. And that's the coconut octopus saying the end. That's wrapped up. Barbara has some books up here if you want to take a look. Thank you very much for coming.